the only way to stay relevant as a sport is to shorten it.
Cricket will be in the Olympics as well going forward.
Yes, in
Right?
LA
In a-
2028.
It is going to be the T20 format.
What the ICC did well was transitioning the format of Test cricket as well.
Test cricket is the truest form of cricket. T20 is the new sexy format. It's short. It's got more international viewership. ODI cricket, what is its sales pitch? It's just something that falls in between those.
It's the middle child, Krishna. It's
It is
literally the
literally
middle child. Is there a way to save it? I don't think so. Do I want it saved? I don't think so either. So,
Way to bring the mood down, Maz. What the fuck?
the biggest pain point for me is T20 World Cups being held every 2 years.
From a financial perspective, cricket just needs T20s.
T10 is just, according to me, a trash format. It should stick to the retired players playing. Baseball. I was waiting for this moment. And I'm going to say this, and this goes to all my British friends. It doesn't work.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All About Sports, the podcast, a podcast by the fans, for the fans. This week you're joined by two of your co-hosts, Mazhar Gadiwala and myself, Rishabh. And we're talking all about cricket, which is obviously the topic of the time. Cricket World Cup, of course, is going on right now. At the time that we're recording, India has freaking finally beaten New Zealand in an ICC tournament, which feels pretty damn good. But we're talking all about cricket, and specifically want to dive into basically the future of the cricket format. How do we see cricket being played? There are obviously three different formats. What formats do we see as prevailing in the future? Are there going to be some changes that we see even in the style of cricket being played? We're seeing a lot more club cricket. How does that how does that work vis-a-vis international cricket? So we're hoping to dive into all of that in this week's episode. Quickly, before we dive into this, just a quick reminder of last week's episode. We talked all about sports ownership, but specifically within football. We talked about some of the good qualities of a football owner, some of the bad qualities of a football owner. It's especially relevant in this current time with Ratcliffe's potential 25% takeover of Manchester United. So we do dive a lot into Manchester United. So if you're a Manchester United fan, you can join in on the not happiness, sadness and chaos of the Glazers. But we talk more broadly than that about football ownership in general. But with that, Muzz, let's get into this week's episode, which is all about the future of cricket and how cricket is going to be played going forward. I'm going to keep it pretty open-ended with you. Just super broadly, how do you see cricket being played in the future with these three different formats that we have currently, which is primarily in the international scale? We have Tests, ODIs, T20 cricket. Just to provide a bit of context for people who maybe don't follow cricket, Test matches are usually played over 5 days. Each team has 2 opportunities to play the game, which is 2 innings. ODI cricket is 50 overs or 300 balls. And T20 cricket is 120 balls or 20 overs, which is the quickest format of the game. And both ODIs and T20Is, each team just gets 1 chance at batting or 1 innings each. But Mazhar, with that, just dive into it. Across these 3 formats, which do you see as being the most prevalent format? How do you see teams zoning in and out of these 3 formats going forward?
It's actually, there's no straight answer to this question, Krishna, but it's very evident, and I don't think it takes anyone to know where cricket is headed from a long-term perspective. The fact that we will have a T20 Cricket World Cup being played in the USA just talks about the expansion of cricket as a global sport. It is primarily known as a sport that is played by Commonwealth nations, basically all the nations that the British had colonized, because that was the culture they brought in. But the fact that it's reached the US speaks volumes of how much cricket is expanding and growing. The commercial value of cricket is massive, right? While we were just watching this match on Hotstar, on Disney Plus Hotstar in India, the number that I saw there in the top right corner is 3.6 crores of people who tuned in to watch India versus New Zealand live when Virat Kohli was on song and on the verge of 100, which he's narrowly missed out on and would have tied Sachin Tendulkar's record of most ODI centuries. But coming back to the main thing, the globalization and the commercialization of the sport, and realizing that the only way to stay relevant as a sport is to shorten it. Because football, if you see, is a 90-minute game. Here, cricket, one inning will get done in around that much time. So you still have the second inning to be played. So it becomes like a 3 hour, almost a 4 hour experience. So I think in that sense, the only way it's headed is T20 cricket becoming the main thing. What the ICC did well was transitioning the format of Test cricket as well. Test cricket being the longest format, it's for the aficionados in a way, to so to speak. The real test. There's a reason why it's called Test cricket, because it tests your patience, it tests your skill sets, it tests your ability to make it through excruciating conditions over 5 days, in the heat you're fielding. Sometimes the fact that your attention span needs to be on throughout, then the unreal banter that comes up in Test match cricket. I think it's a full event in a lot of ways. And it's hard for people to understand that sports can be played over 5 days like that, because they don't have anything relatable. ODI cricket for me is the biggest loser in all of this. The 1 day format, which I so dearly love, but now I don't. It's not because the format is at fault. It's because of the nature of T20 cricket that has sort of destroyed that game. The fact that no cricketers have the patience or the ability to understand how to pace an inning, don't have the patience to play out deliveries and make it through to the last over. I think that old school of thought has completely gone. They are like, why should we play 50 overs if we can score 400 runs in 40? That has been the downfall of so many teams. And that's why in this Cricket World Cup so far, we've only seen one game going somewhat down to the wire, with India versus New Zealand, which was also like India seemed to have it in control relatively throughout. But New Zealand gave it a fight because even they played out their 50 overs. There was temperament there. There was a matured innings from youngsters as well that we saw. It was good cricket on display. And that is dead otherwise. We've seen Australia suffer because they don't have players who have the patience to play out the 50 overs. Barring David Warner, who's supremely experienced, also a player in all three formats. Steve Smith's not in form, and I mean, frankly, I think he struggles in India. I know people say he's phenomenal, but and he has done well in India. He's done well against us on a lot of occasions. But I still haven't seen him coming to the party like he does in any other part of the world. So what I'm trying to say is they all have faults in their skill sets, not skill sets because they have the skills, in their ability to read the game and understand that it's literally 180 balls more that you have to play out as compared to a T20. So I think that understanding and that patience is something that people haven't learned, because if you stick for 300 balls, you're guaranteed to do well. That's what made MS Dhoni such a successful captain in the ODI format, because his simple logic was play till the last ball. It worked for Ravindra Jadeja, it's worked for Virat Kohli. That's why the Indians are the team that are thriving. Yes, they are playing at home, but India had a phenomenal World Cup in 2019 as well. Had one bad game against New Zealand and it cost them. They were unbeaten, the only unbeaten side in the 2019 World Cup, and up until then.
Way
So,
to bring the mood down, Maz. What the fuck? Why would you bring up this tournament? But I agree. I see your point. But why bring
so, so I know I've harped on about it, but I think it's important for people to understand the context of what has happened and why the shortest format of the game means the death of the second oldest format of cricket. Is there a way to save it? I don't think so. Do I want it saved? I don't think so either. And that is extremely, and I know that's a very, let's say, radical sort of opinion. But the fact is, what's the point? Why should I sit watching cricket for 8 hours if there's no quality in it after a point? If it's going to be so one sided where one team bats well or then gets all out for like 120, there's no entertainment there. I'm happy right now because India is winning games. but I want to enjoy the other games of the World Cup as a neutral as well. What's the fun in a World Cup where no one competes? We saw it in the FIFA World Cup, right? Morocco being the dark horses. That's what we live for those exciting moments where the underdogs come up. I'm not going to say no, the underdogs have performed again, the Netherlands and Afghanistan. So now I'm a bit torn now when I think about it and I process it a bit more, because maybe this has also benefited them because it gives them an opportunity, because it sort of equalizes the playing field in a way. Barring India and New Zealand right now, it seems like no one else knows how to play 50 overs. I mean, South Africa also, I still don't think they can play 50 overs. If they bat first, yes. If they bat second, there's no hope. So there's a lot of question marks. I'm done, Krishnan. Go ahead.
No, that's a great point, and I completely agree with you. The number of games we've seen in this tournament where both sides have played out the 50 overs has been pretty minimal. The number of games that have gone to the last 5 overs, pretty much none. Even the two upsets that you talk about, the Afghanistan upset against England and then Netherlands versus South Africa, weirdly not even close games. It wasn't like a close upset. Netherlands completely hammered South Africa, and same thing with Afghanistan and England. So I love your
England
point.
just capitulated, Krishnan. Like what? They were 64 for 6 or something. It's a shocker. Yeah, Bazball. I was waiting for this moment. I'm going to say this, and this goes to all my British friends. It doesn't work. It works only in England. Stop living in this fantasy world that you thought that you're going to come to India and win the World Cup. Just forget about it.
It's funny, Muz, because it pains me to say this because I love Brendan McCullum, and he's one of my favorite players when he was playing cricket. He was such an innovative batsman. But I agree, just frankly, I think this whole branding of baseball has just put a target on the backs of England, and so far they haven't been able to live up to it. But I love the two big points that you hit on, Mazhar, which is specifically the death of ODI cricket and the reasons for it, which I think can be bucketed into two things. I loved your first bit, which I think is a little bit to do with branding, like you said. Test cricket is the truest form of cricket. T20 is the new sexy format. It's short, it brings in money, it brings in fans, it's got more international viewership. ODI cricket does not have any branding to it. There is no, what is its sales pitch? It's just something that falls in between
It's
those.
the middle child, Krishnan. It's
It is
literally the
literally the
middle
middle
child.
child.
I
It is
just realized that.
You're
So,
completely right. It's the middle forgotten child. And I think literally the only saving grace it has right now is the World Cup. And the fact that the World Cup is in this format means that, for example, this year a lot of teams played a lot more ODI cricket just to prepare them for the World Cup. But I think they're going to really struggle to keep that up going forward, if we're being honest. The second thing is similar to and this probably ties into the branding question. It's just an awkward format from a time perspective. It's an 8-hour format. Like you said, you spoke about, a lot of sports usually being in that 2-hour range, right? You say basketball's 2.5 hours. You'd say football is a 2-hour game. T20 cricket is probably about 4 hours. ODI cricket is about 8 hours. Unlike Test cricket, where you can even potentially miss a day, you can miss 1 or 2 days and catch up with it on the third or fourth day. You don't
not
have
anymore,
that with ODI.
Krishnan.
Not
Not
anymore.
anymore. Because they're so influenced by T20s again. They can't even play out 5 days anymore.
That is a good point. More like 3 days. Yeah, 3 to 4 days is probably more of an accurate, and then a day session on the fifth day, maybe. I also did want to call out something that I thought was kind of interesting. This was, I believe, in 2018 that ICC did this huge marketing project and this marketing survey to generally test viewership across the world. And kind of unsurprisingly, as you would expect, from those surveyed, they found only about 64% of fans are interested in all three formats. 69% were
I'd say that's
interested.
quite high.
I actually am surprised. Even though it's not like 80 or 90, I'm actually surprised by how high it is. Admittedly, I think there's a bit of a skew in the sample because it's amongst cricket followers. So I'm kind of wondering who they sampled. But once you know that it's cricket followers, it said 64% were interested in all three formats. Interestingly, the interest kind of increased as you decrease the time of the format. So the survey had it as 69% were interested in Test cricket, 88% were interested in ODIs, and not surprisingly, the highest interest percentage was T20s at 92%. We also looked this up right before this call. We were trying to see, okay, can we get some idea of how many, ODIs versus T20s versus test matches are being played? And we saw an interesting progression. If you look at a time period that starts from September 2016 and goes all the way up to September 2022, so that's a sample size of 6 years, you kind of see this progression that we've been talking about. And if you are listening to us just on audio, we'll put this up on our Instagram as well so you can check it out there. But for our video listeners, what this chart is basically showing is of the total games played in any given year, what percentage of the games were T20s, what percentage were ODIs, and what percentage of the games were test matches. Now, each year is broken up into a summer session and a winter session based on the northern hemisphere understanding of summer and winter. So the winter session goes from September to April, and then the summer session goes from May to September. So, with that in mind, Mazhar, you see exactly what you're talking about, which is when we look at it starting in September 2016, the number of T20s played is actually around the same as the number of test matches being played, which is around 25% of the game. So a fourth of the games being played are test matches, a fourth of the games being played are T20Is, and about 50% of the games are ODIs. So ODIs are still the most prevalent format. Now, you'll notice kind of across the board, test matches are sort of generally around that 15 to 20% range. Again, noting that test matches take 5 days, so obviously they won't be the most prevalent. But as you start to move across time, you notice exactly what been talking about, Mazhar, which is the number of T20Is starts to tick up. It goes from being a fourth of the games, closely up to 30%, goes up to 40%. And then we see when that big switch happens, which in my opinion is right after the 2019 Cricket World Cup. Now, the 2019 Cricket World Cup, of course, is an ODI tournament. It happens in 2019, and in that session, which is the May 2019 to September 2019 session, of course, there are far more ODIs played. Of the total games played, 71% of the games are ODIs. But starting from that next session onwards, T20Is become the most prevalent format. And consistently since then, T20Is have made up 50% of the games that are played. So it is kind of interesting where we've shifted from ODIs making up 50% of the games being played to now being closer to like 30 to 40%. T20 cricket has gone from being maybe a fourth of the games being played to now about half of the games being played. And Test cricket has dropped from being around one fourth of the games being played to around, let's say, 12 to 15% of the games being played. So there's no denying T20 cricket is definitely the most prevalent form of cricket being played, and it seems to be the case that it'll stay consistent for some time now. So the one thing I will call out in these charts is they don't include qualifications for tournaments. So qualifications for the ODI World Cup or the T20 World Cup are not currently included in this. And we actually looked even further back. So, looking further back in time, a couple more sessions, even going all the way up till September of 2014. And we found the exact same thing, which is, in fact, as we go further back in time, there are more and more ODIs being played. And ODIs are by far the most predominant format in world cricket. The only exception, even going back a couple more years, was the 2015-2016 session because the 2016 T20 World Cup was happening at that time. But the flip is obvious. ODIs have been for some time the most predominant format of cricket, at least going back to the 2000s. But I think it's pretty undeniable. Starting after the 2019 World Cup, that flip has happened, and I don't think we're ever going back. If anything, I think T20 cricket is going to be maybe go up to that 60% range where 60% of the games being played are going to be T20Is.
The biggest red flag for me is, and I understand that we're moving towards the T20 direction, and I also know I have a bias because I'm one of those aficionados who likes all three formats. Actually, I am more inclined towards the 50 overs and tests because I feel like T20 has brought the death of skill in cricket in some sort of way. Because anyone comes and hits, like Mark Wood came and he slammed the ball for so many sixes, and he's a frontline pace bowler. It's good in a way because it's good to have more skill sets and be able to play in a certain way. And none of them are really like for me, watching that one pull shot that Kohli hit for six, that flat batted six, speaks wall is way more enjoyable than seeing a tail ender coming and hitting three sixes in a row. Like personally, because at the end of the day, it's a sport. It takes high amount of skill, and I'm not saying these people don't have skill to be able to hit the ball so far, but it's just that you start questioning a lot of other aspects of the game. What has changed? The bats are heavier. They have these two new ball rules in ODI cricket. The pitches are more susceptible now for batting. It's all of those things that have to be taken into consideration as well, which raises a lot of red flags for me in general. But at the same time, I feel like the biggest pain point for me is T20 World Cups being held every 2 years. That is the worst part about it, because I feel like that's where I think people are getting tired, and that's why viewership is suffering. And that is going to bring the end to the ODI format. Because if you're going to keep the 50 over World Cup every 4 years and T20 World Cups just keep happening, cricket will never stop. Then you have your World Test Championship as well. So enough, right? Like we get tired of international breaks as well. So I think that's for me a big concern.
And I think to your point, Maz, irrespective of how people view it, I think the reality of the situation is, from a financial perspective, cricket just needs T20s. The financial impetus that T20 cricket has brought into the world, and a lot of it, obviously, you kind of have to credit the league. So the Big Bash League, IPL, of course, even like the Caribbean Premier League, the South African League, of course, the leagues in England. It is just a requirement to almost sustain the rest of cricket that T20I cricket is required, irrespective of the cost it might have in terms of the quality of cricket being played, or how long teams bat in ODI cricket, or a team's ability to last a full 5 days. I think that is a sacrifice that, unfortunately, cricket just has to make itself more global. We know recently that the cricket was now will be in the Olympics as well going forward. I believe starting 2028, I believe is the first one. Even that, there was no
Yes,
discussion,
in
right?
LA
In
2028.
And even that, there's no discussion, right? It is going to be the T20 format. There was no question of whether is there any other format even come into play. So I think that is one of the challenges where, like we've said a million times before, it comes down to the money, and the money comes from T20 cricket. But Maz, I want to kind of narrow in on this point a little bit more, because we've talked a lot about how the shorter formats are drawing a pull from audiences. Is there any format that you think is potential for growth in the near term future, that is maybe different than the T20 format, but again follows the same process? We've seen the 100 in England. Is there that or anything else that you find interesting as a potential format that might end up blowing up, that has some traction, some part of somewhere in the world?
Honestly, Krishnan, I'm not a fan of the shorter formats of the game, but at the same time, I have now slowly started to appreciate T20 cricket after watching the 100 and after watching T10. T10 is 10 overs. And then I even watched that. I know that was just for fun, but it's like it's head to head. Kevin Peterson versus Harbhajan Singh and Rashid Khan. They just played some format. I forgot what it's called. But yeah, it was like basically one over. You play like one over against each other. So not one over, it's some 10 balls or some 20 balls. I don't know. So it's just a head to head thing. Obviously, that's all for entertainment purposes. That's not going to ever make it to ICC, and I hope not. I don't want to see head to head cricket being played. But I've watched the 100, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it is an intriguing format because of the fact that you can allow one bowler to bowl 10 balls in one go. So they don't have overs,
Yep.
but every over is like five deliveries. So, I mean, I would love to see that on an international scale, or at least at the IPL sort of level, at franchise cricket level in other countries too. Because I was just thinking about it. Imagine a Jasprit Bumrah coming in and bowling 10 balls at you to start off the inning. Imagine a Mitchell Stark when the ball is reversing to come in and bowl 10 balls at you. Imagine having to deal with an Ashwin and a Jadeja and tandem bowling 10 balls. It's crazy when you think about it. So I think that's something that can be explored and I would love to see. But first, obviously, experiment at the franchise level, bring it to the other countries, maybe. Let's see how it goes because I enjoyed it. I loved watching it when I was in London and the games got close. So that element of the T20 doesn't change as such. But I just think the dynamics make it so much more different because there is a high level of skill involved here. It's not so easy. You may think that, oh, in 100 balls, if I score 150, 140, it's easily chaseable. Sorry, mate. Even 5 and over sometimes proves really like a handful in that format. So I would say that T10 is just, according to me, a trash format. It should stick to the retired players playing. We enjoy watching them hit the ball, but that's about it.
Mazhar, I don't know if you remember, there's this show, I can't remember what it was on. I believe it was on when we were younger. You know this show that was in a mini cricket field and there was a big sign, an 8 sign. If you hit the 8 ka sign, you get 8 runs. I'm totally forgetting the show's name.
I remember Sanjay Bangar and Hemang Badani used to play in that.
Yes,
It
it used
used
to
to
be
come on
one
TV
cricketer and all
on
kids.
Hangama or Zoom or something. It was.
Yes. And that
Yeah,
is
I
what
don't
T10
remember that.
cricket reminds me of. It reminds me of that. Oh, it reminds me of that TV show, with all these kids running around and one cricketer. I just can't help but correlate the two
Yeah,
in my head.
exactly. Because if you have 11 players and you have 10 overs, it'll be like literally the games we play on the streets. Like, no, not everyone will get to bat, not everyone will get to
Yeah.
ball.
But I am kind of interested by T20, and I think more than the number of overs in T20, T10 cricket, I think what's interesting is changing up the format of bowling, right? Because we've kind of been stuck in this mindset of okay, we divide the total number of overs by 5, and every bowler gets.
You meant the 100. You said T10, so I was
Oh,
a bit
sorry. The
confused.
format of the 100.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, the format of the 100, where we're so used to this thinking of okay, every bowler just gets the total number of overs divided by 5 as the max limit, and every bowler has to alternate. But I think there's a lot of capacity to change things up, right? I would love to see a format even now. I was especially thinking of today's game where Kuldeep Yadav was getting whacked. I would love a system that goes, hey, you can have a super bowler option, which allows like one
A
bowler to bowl
substitute.
two
Yeah.
extra bowler to bowl like 2 extra overs. The other thing like that exactly you made me think of by saying that was a super sub option. They've tested that out in cricket before. We could see something like a super sub potentially being allowed. Different weird caveats. We saw the free hit being introduced as just a new kind of rule that was kind of fun. I think there is opportunity for maybe some nuance and just rule changes within cricket without necessarily changing time that much. Because I think there's a limit to how little you can go in terms of number of overs to still make it somewhat enjoyable to watch.
Something that can be explored is to save 50 over cricket.
Mm-hmm.
Not to save 50 overs necessarily, to save 1 dayers,
Mm-hmm.
is maybe revert to the 40 over format. I think that is something worth exploring as well because it just 10 overs less means you save an hour practically. So, like, I think that is something that can be explored. Anyway, so many games are not going to the 50th over anyway. Most of the action teams either thrive or succumb between the 31st to 40th overs.
Yep.
It's typically the 31st to 40th over spell where they just completely collapse or then, you know, go and hit like 8, 9 runs and over, and then there's no looking back. Where two guys get stuck at the crease and it's mayhem. So I think cutting it 10 over short is probably something that could change it and liven it up. And maybe might be more interesting than a T20 format as well, because there's just more to look forward to.
Yeah, now that I think about it, there is a good point. There's such a big gap between 50 overs and 20 overs, right? There's only a 20 over gap between 20 and 0. So there's a limit to how low you can go that end, but there's a little bit more space between 20 and 50 theoretically that you can maybe adjust on. I'm also curious, one of the things that I didn't bring up, but in the same marketing survey that ICC took, there was a little bit of information they shared about the difference in popularity by country. And one of the interesting things they found is the strongest interest. So amongst, when you just looked at viewers from each country and broke them out, the country that showed the most interest in Test cricket, with 80% of the English viewers feeling this way, was England. England, interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, kind of expected. 86% of the English viewers found, Test cricket is the format that they follow. For South Africa, 91% followed ODI cricket, and Pakistan, about 98% followed T20 cricket. Look, at the end of the day, I think we all know the numbers and the style of cricket that gets played is probably 90% influenced by South Asia, which is the biggest population pocket, and then to some extent Australia and England will have a little bit of a say. I think anything outside of that, South Africa, it's great that you're like ODIs, but sadly, and I'm not saying it's fair, I don't think their viewership is enough to contribute to major decision making at the ICC level, just because of the size and strength of South Africa. And the way cricket functions is kind of skewing it towards where they get the most eyeballs. Hey everyone, so that's all that we have for this week's episode of the podcast. But if you did enjoy this conversation, make sure to tune back in next week, because we're going to continue talking about the future of cricket. This week, of course, we focused in on the different formats in cricket and sort of the push and pull that's happening between them. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about club cricket versus international cricket. We're seeing a lot more club cricket being played around the globe, and we're starting to think whether that is going to start overshadowing international cricket in the years to come. So do check that one out as well. With that, thank you for listening and have a great week ahead. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a like and share it with anyone else who might be interested. You can also subscribe on any social media platform that you prefer, and all our links are in the bio. We also have a website with all our episodes as well as blogs and a whole lot of other sports content, so make sure to check that out as well.